Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dirt NFCA podcast presented by Netting Professionals. We are joined today with Jill Zwagerman. Jill is coming to us to give some great perspective on Title IX, legal issues that coaches face, and has been such a huge advocate for coaches. She may look familiar. You might have seen her at convention not too long ago. But Jill, thank you so much for joining us today and being with us.
I am honored to be here, Joanna. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Well, for people who have no idea who you are, the work you do, first of all, lucky them. But secondly, a little bit lucky them. Secondly, give us the view. What do you do? How did you get into it? And why do you love your work?
Okay, so I am a lawyer, which is why you probably don't want to know me. You don't really want to get involved in me. But I have to tell you, if you get involved in me, I will do my very best to help you. So my background is I was a Division I track runner at Drake University. And so sports have been a big part of my existence, a big part of my identity. I feel like without sports, I would not be a lawyer. I feel like without my running career, I wouldn't have the kinds of relationships and friends that I do today. And I also wouldn't have the appreciation that I have for how important college sports is. And I love softball. I think it's great. I sucked at it, so that part was not very good for me. I don't have depth perception, so hitting was a real problem. But I was fast, so I could get to first base. If I could just, I think we called it slap bunt when I was in high school. So that's what I would do. I would lead off, hopefully get on. That's probably the extent of my softball experience. But what sports did was it drew a lot of attention to me for the inequities in sports. And I saw that as a student athlete, which I'm sure many of your student athletes also see. It's even more prevalent. I think it kind of went on a little hiatus for a while. During the glory years of like 2010. I mean, I don't even know if that's a thing, but it's up in our faces again. And, some of the inequities that we've seen in college basketball primarily, and, and then now how the NCAA treats its female championship sports seasons as opposed to the males. And so it's really coming to light, and it's a really, really important thing. We have a generation of young women who are not going to sit around and take it anymore. So it's right on everyone's mind. It's really prevalent. And what I do is I represent coaches all across the country who kind of get into that icky, yucky spot where they are losing their jobs, and it's primarily for gender reasons. So that's where my focus is on my practice. I also do other Title IX work when institutions cut sports and they're out of compliance with Title IX. That's when I jump in and say, we're not cutting this sport. Or when there's institutions that need to add sports because they're so far out of compliance. So those are kind of my two Title IX issues. I've also done some sexual assaults in college. That's a whole different other part, but I know coaches sometimes are the first line of reporting for that. So that is one thing that I've kind of dabbled in a little bit too. But my passion is to represent the coaches when our coaches, female or male, but it seems to be more prevalent with females when they get attacked by student athletes or by the administration because of what I would call bogus or just ridiculous accusations that aren't true. And then their career becomes on the line. And so that's where I step in.
You'd think I'd be able to find my mute button faster in 2022. Always a challenge in the mornings. But Jill, I think that's great for people to get to know you. And if you don't mind, if we start with the compliancy piece, so many people are familiar with Title IX. Oh, there's 3 prongs and participation, but when you really start peeling back the onion, there's so much that we're not familiar with. We think we understand on the face, but maybe it doesn't make as much sense. So can you give us an overview of what it means to be compliant with Title IX and how some schools, not to generalize, but if they're going to fall short, maybe where that happens most often?
Okay, well, the easiest one is always the participation, right? That's the one that we understand. But what people don't understand is participation does not mean 50-50, and it does not mean sport to sport, right? So a lot of people will think, well, if there's 8 women's sports and there's 8 men's sports, then they're in compliance, and that is absolutely wrong. It also does not mean if your athletic department is 50% male and 50% female that you're in compliance. That also is not the standard. So what you have to do is you base the participation numbers off of the student body population. So what that means is the entire student body population, if they are, let's say, and it's usually predominantly female. In most institutions, it's mostly female. So you're going to have usually like around a 52 to 54%, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but that's kind of about average. You have 52% females in your student body. You have to have 52% females in your athletic student body, right? Your athletic participation has to be 52% female. So it has to mirror that. And that's where a lot of institutions get into trouble, because they don't have that, especially if the institution has football. And I don't mean to dog on football, but football requires a ton of student athletes, predominantly male, very, very, very few females. And they, they have very, very large teams, and there's not an equivalent for females. So that sort of gets the scale off balance from the get-go, and institutions have to work very, very hard if they want to be in compliance after that. And most institutions right now, if you look, are not in compliance with the participation number, and they know they're not. Title IX is a bit wonky in that when it was passed, it was not like you will be in compliance by such and such a date. It said, well, just make some progress along the way. And 50 years later, we're still not in compliance with Title IX, especially in participation. So I mean, I don't have a full estimate, but if I was just guessing, I would say, most institutions, I would say, something like 85 to 90%, if they have football, are not in compliance with Title IX. It just is very challenging for the institutions. So that's kind of the big participation number. And then generally what follows after participation is, if you have that many student athletes who are male, who are getting benefits in either scholarships or facilities or some of the other uniforms, I mean, the basic Title IX, what are the student athletes getting? Is it equivalent? When you have that many more males, almost by definition, you're going to be providing more benefits to the male student athletes, right? So that means, if a softball team is not fully funded, right, but you have a football team, your football players are probably getting more benefits than your softball players. And again, that's another misconception. You don't compare softball to football. You don't compare men's basketball to women's basketball, although that's a pretty easy comparison. You review the athletic department as a whole for males and an athletic department as a whole for females. Which again, when it comes to that third prong of Title IX, like your benefits, your treatment, generally your men's basketball team and your football team are going to be the two, golden children of the university. And in the treatment section, it's not going to be equivalent, because you're going to have, there's some institutions where scooters are being provided to the men's basketball team and to the football team so that they can get around the campus, but there is nothing like that being provided to any females. So there's treatments where your girls, your young women, your student athletes see this on their campus, and that creates, a little resentment. I mean, I want a scooter. I don't want to have to walk to class. I mean, I work hard in my practice later on. And why do the guys get to have a scooter? it's that kind of thing. And that resentment starts to breed. And that's when, like one scooter is probably not going to be the downfall of program, but it is going to get their attention. And then they're going to start looking at other places. And that's where that dissatisfaction, the contempt, the things where when you talk about a culture where the student athletes get unhappy and then they start complaining because they see all these benefits being provided to the males, don't understand why they don't get the same benefits. It's a super long-winded answer, Joanna, but
no, it's perfect. And you struggle because I think some of the first things that come up are some of our inflated rosters right now, whether it's from the COVID exemption, and we're seeing, softball teams with 30 plus, and then you're seeing some others. We had a new head coaches call. We do this, every month for coaches who are brand new, never been a head coach before at a collegiate level. And we try to connect them with some mentors. And on one of our calls, there was a Division III head coach, and she said that she had to carry 34 on her roster mandated from administration. And if she didn't, she couldn't have a part-time assistant coach. The only way she could keep the part-time assistant coach was to keep the roster of 34. So my first question is, when you hear this, right, you've got 85 full football scholarships at a Division I bowl championship, level football team. And the numbers just alone, let alone, as you said, if you have baseball and wrestling, I mean, you're stuck. And you're a Midwesterner, I'm a Midwesterner. Baseball, football, wrestling, that's just the norm. You're going to have all three in some of those. What is the overall goal for administrators that are asking coaches to carry more and more and more on the women's side? Is it an effort to try to bridge some of that participation gap? And are there things coaches should be thinking about when I've got 12 scholarships, we play 9 people, and my administrator wants me to carry 30? Like what should a coach be thinking about when that scenario pops up?
That is excellent, Joanna, because that is one of the things that when you have too many people on a roster, right, that creates dissension, that creates dissent among your team, because not everybody gets to play. And so when administration is doing that, I absolutely believe that it's a Title IX participation effort. Mostly wrong efforts, not usually right efforts, right? Because your 29th woman on your softball team is not getting the same participation, the genuine participation opportunity that your 15th member of the basketball team is getting, of the male, right? They're capped at 15 people on their basketball teams usually. And so those individuals are getting a much better participation experience. They're getting the coaching that they deserve. They're getting the benefits of the program of having, this professional coach in their world, making them a better person, making them a better athlete, all the things that we love that coaches do for us. And then when the administration puts these maximum numbers on there, it is almost entirely because they have a participation issue under Title IX. Because as everyone knows, there are some coaches who like having a little bit bigger team, right? And moving people around. And there are some coaches that have, smaller teams, and that's how they best coach, right? And so it's a partnership between what does the student athlete want and what the coach wants. And that should be the base, right? But then you do have departments who come in and say, you're going to have, 34 women on your softball team. Big area that we see this in to kind of pay attention to, and I know it's not softball, but rowing. If there's a rowing team, those teams should be about maybe 50, and there's universities who require them to carry 100, 110, 90, and that's one of the areas where there's a big push to kind of exploit the program a little bit, where 34 women and one coach for softball, or maybe a part-time assistant coach, I would argue is reckless. right? Like you've got safety issues here. I mean, you've got like softball is one of those sports where you kind of need to make sure. I mean, yes, they're young women, but they goof off. Like we know this, right? And they do stupid things sometimes, but there are safety issues concerned with not having enough adult supervision. I mean, I know they're adults, but are they really adults at this point? But you're tasked with providing this, and then those individuals aren't getting the coaching experience. You spread yourself way too thin when you have 34 people or 30 people on a softball team with one part-time assistant coach, in my opinion. And it's going to be very hard to be successful. Keeping that number of assistant coaches down is just purely economics for the administration. There's no, I mean, it's just a money thing. It's not personal. It's just going to be a money thing, but it's going to feel pretty personal to you as the coach. And it's going to feel really personal to your team because they're the ones who don't get the best out of the coach and the coaching experience because the coach is spread too thin. So, but back to your point, it absolutely is, you know, if you're getting a number that you have to carry on your roster, then it's to try to meet the participation gap.
Sure. And, you know, one thing that you talked about, and I think this is really crucial, the experience as it relates to student athletes, and not just in, you know, the field or the facilities or the locker room, but when you're talking about coaches and personnel and some of those things, that is an area where we've seen, I was in a men's basketball game last week, and, you know, the running joke is count the suits in the timeout, right? How many suits do you see compared to, you know, student athletes in a jersey? And, you know, when we look up a football roster, you know, after a championship game, or is that something? In softball and baseball, we've been trying to add, you know, a fourth countable coach, and there's an effort there. But is that something that can matter? I mean, is that something when you think about that third prong, the coaches and the access that student athletes have to resources provided by professionals, whether it's, you know, academics and operations, anything?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, the NCAA, you know, monitors, you know, they dictate how many coaches you can have. You know, and you're capped at how many coaches you can have. And, you know, adults they may love the game, but they can't make a career out of, you know, being a volunteer coach, you know, all the time. So it absolutely makes a difference. It absolutely affects the student athlete experience. There's no reason other than money, once again, and athletic departments are always going to, okay, I shouldn't say always, but primarily if there's you know, there's always room to cut, they're going to cut assistant coaches of female sports. You don't see it cut as much with male sports, especially not in your favorite sports, your football, your basketball. A lot of times baseball will be one that they've elevated or a higher tier sport. Wrestling, hockey, you know, if the team has, or if the school has hockey, there's, you know, and then you'll have sports like track, you know, that they'll get cut and they'll have you can only have, you know, half the many people on the team that you can have, you know, to try to keep men's sports down. So the athletic department will go and then punish a different sport to elevate football or basketball or whatever sport they choose. But the assistant coaching is one of those things where I mean, you all know this, right? When you have a good assistant coach and you're on the same page, like that's one crucial element to your team being successful. You know, you can depend on that assistant coach to, you know, do whatever it is they need to do with the student athletes, or get this finished, or get that, you know, the workout for, you know, take this group of people and go over there and work them hard, you know, and that's one of the things that affects your ability to coach properly. And then again, affects the student athlete experience because they're just not getting the attention that they should.
So in your experience, Jill, I'm sure that you've seen a number of complaints, cases, concerns brought forward from institutions, from coaches, from student athletes. And one thing that I've noticed just as an avid observer, the student athlete voice and the difference that the student athlete voice can make, especially in today's world, student athlete welfare, and whether it's fear of the bad publicity compared to the complaining coach, the coach who's just disgruntled and upset. What's the difference that you've seen? Maybe it's recently, maybe it's not, maybe it's longer term than I'm thinking, but when student athletes bring issues forward, parents bring issues forward compared to a coaching staff who might bring issues forward.
Yeah, it's really troubling. And I don't know where the shift actually happened. Sometime, after the 90s, sometime in the 2000s, where young adults aren't really young adults anymore, and they're still kind of under their parents' thumb, or parents believe that they have a more active voice in what is happening to their adult children, than say, and it's not just in sports either. Just keep in mind, my sister-in-law is at a law school, or she was on admissions at a law school, and would get letters from mothers and, saying that you need to let my son in, and, and they're 22 years old trying to get into law school, and you're getting letters from parents, so I think there was a culture shift at some place where parents became a lot more vocal about student athletes, and student athletes got, we talk about it, and right or wrong, fair or unfair, that this is like a generation of entitlement. And unfortunately, that has bled really hard into sports, right? You've got kids in high school who were the best, the stars, and they come to college and they're not the best and they're not the star anymore. And that just creates a lot of problems because they don't know how to deal with it and they're not equipped. And then you add that on top of the overactive hyper mom or dad who says, my kid is a star, and the kid can't, your student athlete can't take that they're not the star. So, it comes down to playing time. It comes down to my coach hates me. It comes down to all the things where the coach doesn't hate you, but you're not good enough to play right now. That then those voices are the voices that the administration is hearing, and they just don't want to deal with it. They're not equipped to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with it. They go, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then they get weird and they're like, okay, just don't have any more complaints. Just be quiet. And the coaches are screaming for help, but the administration is for whatever reason has decided they're more afraid of a student and their mom than they are the coach. And I don't know why. I'm trying to change it. It's why I go after administrations all the time. We don't, when I represent a coach and we have a really, really nasty family or student athlete on the other side, we don't generally go after them, right? Like they're just, because it's the administration who can shut that down. The administration is the one who could say, no, I support my coach. And the parent will back off and the kid will transfer or not, or quit or whatever, right? Which is the way this is supposed to work. But they, for whatever reason, have decided the voice of the student and the voice of the complaining parent will be louder than the coach. Not always, right? There are some really great administrations out there. But those things can be a real eye opener for coaches for the first time who are dealing with an unhappy student athlete or parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so much of that is difficult too, because I've always thought there's so many things that I've heard male coaches say to student athletes that if I would have ever said anything like that, like the way that it would be taken, perceived, and then vice versa, things that I would say that, would maybe not be seen the same way coming from a male coach. And I know that there's been a lot of work, and you have spearheaded a lot of work in the gender discrimination side of some of this. Can you talk a little bit about that, of just some differences when a female coach and a male coach, because we have both. I mean, in softball, we're pretty 50-50 in a lot of different capacities, and more so in our youth clientele, but what are some of the differences that you've seen in female coaches and male coaches?
So one of the biggest differences is that female coaches are supposed to be nurturing, right? A lot of your student athletes may have never even had a female coach before. And so they come to college and they've got this female coach who isn't like their mom, or isn't like their, favorite aunt or their favorite teacher who puts their arm around them and says, that's okay. They say, no, get your butt back out on the field and do it again, do it better. And that can be a real eye opener, and it can be a shock. And that transitions into, my coach hates me. My coach doesn't get me. My coach, this and that. And that is a thing that is almost predominantly towards females. However, there is some of that towards male coaches of females as well, right? So there's kind of a tier. Males coaching males can basically do what they want, right? And that has been shown time and time again, that unless it's on video, guys probably not getting fired of a male. And there's actual abuse that is going on there, right? Like throwing chairs, punching students, punching their athletes in the stomach. I mean, come on, right? Like this is, and there's not a coach, softball, male or female, who's ever gonna, punch their girls in the stomach. Like, it's not happening. So there's like, that level. And then there's males coaching females, right? And they've got a tougher time than these people up here, because if they get complaints, and we're starting to see that a little bit more, that males getting complaints from the student athletes. Now, administration will sometimes back them more than they will the female coaching females, so there's a little bit, but this is getting closer, I think. And the males coaching males are still up here unless you have video evidence, where there's nothing wrong with your coaching style. I mean, everyone has a different coaching style. Some coaches yell, some don't. Some just sit there, and that, like sometimes the silence is more intimidating for a young woman who was used to being yelled at than being yelled at. Like, my coach hates me. They won't even talk to me, right? Like, that's a complaint that coaches are getting. And they're like, what do you mean? I don't even yell, I mean, so I don't mean to say this lightly, but there are definitely, I think, what we're seeing is that these student athletes believe that they're entitled to a certain coaching style. And that part is getting in the way of you being able to coach properly, right? Because the student athlete just is not a good fit for your program, and they probably need to go somewhere else. But instead they don't want to go somewhere else, because what we do know is that female student athletes are much less likely to transfer, because they have, and studies show this, that males will transfer, they'll just go somewhere else. But females have their friend base, their social networks, everything that they like about the university that they're at or the college. And so they stay. And that becomes harder because they don't just leave.
And that's true for coaches too. We've done so many studies with, female coaches and climbing the ladder and job opportunities. And, there's a whole group of studies on so much of that, with the difference between, female coaches and male coaches. But I think that double standard, that we're talking about is definitely prevalent, and something a lot of coaches are seeing even in second opportunities. Even a coach who has been non-renewed from a contract, a coach that has left under a disappointing 10-year win-loss only, no dark clouds. It still has been more difficult, I think, for those female coaches to find a second opportunity than the male counterparts who, it's they did something, they were fired, and it's a month later, hey, they're the head coach at this other new school because they win, and we can run a laundry list of names out. We won't, everybody knows some, but are there ways that female coaches need to think about how they can help themselves in these situations that have become almost inevitable in sport? I mean, we have seen in softball alone some of our greatest leaders, greatest coaches attacked personally, and, you know, a couple examples I'm thinking of have survived, which is rare, you know, but it's worked out for them, but there's still damage caused in recruiting and in so many ways. What are some things that you would suggest coaches who may find themselves in these situations or may find themselves post these situations try to continue in their career path that they love?
So the biggest thing is to try to jump out in front of it, right? Thinking that it's going to go away. I think what we have found is that it doesn't, right? And it just, like, the dissatisfaction, and again, you're not going to make every student athlete happy, but where the coaches start to get in trouble is when that student athlete can't get it together. And because they, you know, you start getting the emails from the mom or the dad and thinking that, you know, oh, I'll just, you know, give a little response and then brush it off is what you should be able to do. But it's not working in today's environment. Those parents are entitled to an explanation. They're entitled to, you know, whatever they want out of you. And so, in my opinion, the best thing that you can do is to get your administration involved right from the get-go. You make them part of your process so that they feel invested in it. And, you know, hopefully you have good administration, because there are some cases where you're going to try this and it's not going to work and they're just going to take a hands-off approach. And then I've had cases where they just say, oh, you didn't even tell me this. And thankfully there's, you know, 6 emails where the person has done that. So number one, document, put it in an email because there's a timestamp, and save the email, right? Like, put a file together and save all of this. Because unfortunately your job could be on the line from a very, very stupid thing that you don't understand, right? Like, we had a case once where the coach was accused of abuse because they got in really, really late. There was a accident or something. There was nothing open. Restaurants were closed. And so they went to a convenience store and the coach had some expired power bars and gave the kids expired power bars. And they said that was abuse. You know, I mean, so ridiculous things, right? But but once you start getting those concerns from the parents, right? And they're not like hey, I'm just reaching out. It's more of the, you know, you didn't put a stat on our website. My daughter had an assist, you know, or my daughter had a double and you said she had a base hit on the website. Like, why do you hate her, right? Like, when you get those kinds of concerns, which I'm guessing there's a lot of you out there where you're like, I don't maintain the website. I don't do the stats for this. Like, they're talking to the wrong person. That is a warning sign. That is a warning sign that they don't think that you're treating their daughter fairly, right? So something as stupid as it was reported on the website that it was a base hit instead of a double, like, you need to pay attention to that, unfortunately, because that is the world that we're in. And so that's when you just start documenting. You say, look, here's a problem. You copy your administrator on it. You copy your sports information department. This parent is upset. I would like this addressed. Please, you know, please help me. What is the best way to do this? And that is why, if you can get your administration invested in your process of dealing with the parent and having a team approach there, just like in anything else, right? They are more likely to have your back, as opposed to finding out that this parent has been emailing you like 6 times and you didn't give the parent the response that they wanted. So my advice on that is, even if you think it's not a big deal, get your administration involved earlier. Now, also understand there are some administrations out there that will not be favorable on this, right? And they don't want it. Just handle it, right? And those kinds of situations are much more problematic. And I would say get in contact with Joanna when you have stuff like that, because she can get you to Samantha Ekstrand, and she would be really, really helpful in some of those situations where you're not getting the support that you need, and you might need additional resources or additional help.
Yeah, it always amazes me, when you put this just importance on student athlete welfare, and the coach is the touch point on student athlete welfare at so many levels. And the coach has become almost a middle manager, so to speak, and your hands are tied so often. Yet you have the greatest impact. I always say it's like we're going to build a house, but the homeowner is never going to let the architect speak with the contractor. You're never going to let them talk. You just, and it just baffles me in so many ways. And something that's kind of thrown a little bit of a wrench in this, and this is the last thing I'm going to ask, and we're going to get back to Title IX, but is some of the evaluation tools that are real time, like the apps and some of the things that now athletic departments are using to have constant 24/7 feedback from their employees. Now, I would love the administrators that let the coaches provide that to the administrators, but that doesn't seem to exist, Joe. I don't know why, but it's one of those things. But how does a coach, when you just had a horrible weekend, you lost every game and it was horrible, or you're down 2 players and you're not playing well, or you're playing great, but there's still only 10 people playing. Are there things that coaches can do to educate student athletes on these tools when maybe that education isn't happening from the administrative side?
Yes. In fact, I think that's one of the things that is the most important, is to have that communication with the team, right? And I think that is also something different, from coaching back in the good old days. And I'm kind of making light of that because I think coaching has shifted entirely from the way that the athletes expect to be coached. They expect it to be more of a interactive process, like that they have a voice and they get a say. I mean, and so it's important to set those guidelines up front. I'm the coach. I decide the lineup. That is not one of your responsibilities, and it's not something for you to worry about. And I have a method and a strategy, and you shouldn't have to explain those things to the student athletes, but breaking it down into that very, very basic, like, oh, okay, can stop maybe 1 complaint or 2 complaints or 3 complaints because they feel like they know what your process is. And for some people that can be, really different, or they came from, club sports where their parent was their coach. And so they had a very active say in, who was playing well, and they heard all of that. Or their friend's dad was the coach. And so they heard all of the kind of backstories and things going on. And so you've got an expectation of a student athlete coming in, and now they're not part of those conversations. They don't know why you're making the coaching decisions you are. And that doesn't mean that you need to explain yourself every single step of the way, but having those conversations up front with the student athlete, even saying things like, look, some of you may never have had a female coach before. Raise your hand if you haven't. Right? Like that can be this might be a little bit different for you because I'm not your mom. I'm not your mom. I care about you and I want you to come to me when you have a problem, but I'm not your mom. And I'm going to say, I don't care when you're having your period. Like that's not my issue, right? I don't care about that. But if you have something going on that's affecting your ability to be at practice or, in the classroom, that's when you come to me, right? But I'm not your buddy. I'm not, and you have to maintain those clear lines, which I'm sure most of the coaches do, but they get blurred, right? And especially because of the experience our student athletes had at the high school level or the prep level, and then coming into college where it's just entirely different. And so laying out those expectations can help, right? They may not like it, and but at least, you also have documentation of, I told them on the first day of practice, like, this is what we were doing, and you have your little sheet and you write it out and it's there and they know, right? And so you've done everything to kind of protect yourself and your program. And this is what you see, and this is your vision, and sharing that with them. And then also, having your one-on-ones with the student athlete, always with another coach or someone else in the room, you know, and getting their vision and what they see, and, you know, hearing them, and you may disagree with them, but they need, I think the student athletes now today need more of an explanation that you shouldn't have to give them, but that's just what happens.
Yeah, and going back to so many things from the coach's perspective that they have to deal with. The other thing that some coaches are dealing with is this idea that they just need to be happy. They just need to appreciate what they have. And we hear that a lot when we're talking to so many of our coaches who, have been the pioneers of change when it comes to Title IX. We have a issue with Margie Wright coming up soon, and she's a huge advocate early on in softball, and brought things to the forefront, was able to fight a lawsuit, were victorious. And, you think of these people and these coaches, trailblazers, and they've all heard that, well, you should just be happy. You didn't have this 5 years ago. And how can a coach be happy, be incredibly happy, incredibly grateful, but at the same time still say, okay, but I still see shortcomings here and there? Is that something that we're seeing all over? And do you have suggestions on how coaches can combat that statement?
I don't know if I have a statement, because equity is not just be happy with what you want. And that's the problem. It's not equity if an administration is saying just be happy with what you have. That's not equity, right? And the other part of it is it's the coach's job to advocate for their team, to get more resources, to get more money, to get better uniforms, because, like, let's face it, the student athletes are running this and they want nicer uniforms. And they're not coming to your school if they have to wear a uniform that, is 10 years old and smells bad, right? Like they don't want that. They want their shoes paid for. They want, to feel like they're important. They want to be honored at the basketball game. They want all of those things. And so when the administration says just be happy, I mean, there are other things that coaches can fight for along the lines of treatment, be recognized at the basketball game, right? Where they have the bigger crowd, and talk about the accomplishments at another sport, and have them talk about the softball team, right at the end of the basketball season, that they've got their games coming up and everyone should attend, and, get the marketing department to give away free hot dogs at the softball game, right? Like they give away to get people to get butts in the seats at the basketball game. There are things like that means some of that costs money, but like, having your team honored at the basketball game doesn't cost any money, right? That's nothing. And that's just something simple. Like there are things that you can do, and you don't have to just be happy, because that's not what equity means. Equity if that were the case, then you all be getting $5,000 and that would be your salary, right? I mean, if we didn't have these Title IX advocates fighting for this, because that's what it was, right? Like even after the passage of Title IX, like women were still getting paid, nothing, $400 for a season, coaching 2 different teams, like it, if that's what it was, just be happy, then you all wouldn't be having programs, and you wouldn't have a career, and you'd be doing this on the side. And that's not fair to those young women. It's not fair to those young women.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just a couple more questions. One thing we're seeing a lot right now is the salaries of softball coaches, and they have continued to climb. There are a lot of coaches that are doing great things, and then there are others that are abysmal, to say the least. And then when we start comparing across other sports, is when we have some of the concerns, and so much of that is always market driven, right? The value of the market. And if you are an elite softball coach in your market, whatever that might be, it might be your Division III conference, it might be nationally. Is there a way that you can switch the narrative that please don't compare me to the other softball coaches in my conference or in my market is X, Y, or Z. Because that tends to be the way that we continue to see some softball coaches held down, so to speak. I'm sure it's true for other sports. I'm just not as familiar with that. Any ideas there? Any helpful advice?
Yeah, the salary component is very hard because the market rate it's usually based on two different things. It's based on what you pay, what the other coaches at your particular school are paid, and then also what you're being paid in your geographical or conference. And there's not really a better way to look at it from that aspect other than, going in and having a good administration and selling yourself and them giving you a raise. There's not like a magic number or anything like that you can really point to, but having the, if you're competing in the conference tournament and being successful year after year, that should, market value, to throw their words back at them, that should up your salary. Right. Now it's hard to base that all off of winning, because if you're a severely underfunded program, you're probably not making the conference tour. We know that there's a direct correlation between how much money your program gets, how much scholarships you can offer, how much you can entice the student athletes with the treatment, with the benefits, and your success, right? Because if everybody gets a free iPad, well, that might be a reason to come. Well, if I go here, I can get a free iPad. If I go there, I don't get a free iPad. So I like both schools. I like both coaches, that kind of thing. So that can have a direct effect on the salary. But there's not really a great way other than for you to just go in and ask, right? That's how you get the salary increases. And studies show that women are less likely to go in and ask. Men are more likely to go in and ask. Studies also show that when women go in and ask, that they are treated more harshly for asking for the salary increase as opposed to a man asking for a salary increase. Men are perceived as, well, he's just providing for his family and he needs it, and we still this outdated thing that women aren't providing for their families and should just be, again, happy with what they have. I need to provide for my family. I'd like an increase. Here's why I should have an increase. That's the method I think you want to take, right? Have it why, and a lot of times if you can use, you use your success rate or you use the market of the conference to your advantage. It can be both, right? Like if everyone is paid really low in your conference, that's not going to be a good starting point for you. But if everyone is paid higher, then you use it.
Perfect. Last question for you, Jill. If someone is listening and they think, you know what, I think we might have an issue. I'm hearing all these things and I think we might have an issue. What are the ways that they can try to bring awareness to an issue that might be happening on their campus? In what ways would you suggest or offer them to seek out more information on?
So, for instance, like if you see that your student athletes are just, you hear them talking while they're stretching and things like that. And they're like, hey, did you see what the basketball players got to do? Did you see that they took another plane and we have to drive? That's a warning sign, right? That's something that you should listen to. And you say, okay, you know what? My student athletes are seeing this. I need to make my administration aware of it. And you just say, hey, right. And you do it in your manner, and you don't have to go in and blow up the world and my student athletes demand equity, right? Like that's going to get you nowhere in a big hurry. So you go in and you say, look, my student athletes are seeing this. I want to address this before it's a problem, right? And getting out in front of it. Commiserating with the athletes is probably not the best idea, but like, just, but actually listening to them and saying, tell me more about this, right? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? What are they saying? What is the basketball team getting that, oh, okay. Well, and then, you can go back to administration and say, look, they see this, they're concerned. What can we do? What can we give to softball? right? What can we, and you also don't have to do it. Like if you want to be a little bit more magnanimous about it, what can we give for women's sports? Men's basketball is getting this. Is there something we can do for soccer and softball? Is there something whatever it is, where you don't have to necessarily say, give it to me, it's my program, but letting them know that there's some dissatisfaction with your student athletes, right? Like that's the trigger, I think, right now, because they want to make sure the student athletes are happy and they don't want complaints. Fastest way to get a complaint, but student athletes what happens is they don't complain to the administration that someone got an iPad and they didn't, or someone got to take a plane and they didn't. They're just like, well, that's just the way it is. And then what happens is they blame you as the coach for that, right? And so the school is screwing up in Title IX. They're the ones who are making the inequities. Your student athletes see it, but you get blamed for it, not the administration. So once you hear that dissatisfaction from the student athletes on the treatment, on the fact that, they had this great big banquet where they had it catered and we got to go to, a buffet and, which, but I guess it's a step up from the McDonald's that we had to eat on the road, right? Like that's where you want to bring that kind of stuff to the administration. And again, it doesn't have to be a blow up the world. It's just a look. I've got some student athletes who are not satisfied right now. What can we do? They might still tell you nothing, but at least, and then you document that, right? Followed up with an email. It was great talking to you today, blah, blah, blah. That's the lawyer in me. Everything in an email, document it. It's time stamped. And at least you've let them know that this could be an issue.
I've, until this moment, today years old, never really thought about the connection of when you are so upset with the big picture, with we're not taking charters, we're on a bus back after an 11 p.m. game and the way that will manifest itself, towards the treatment and the words we hear all the time, the bullying or and I've never thought about it in that context. And I think that's really important. I'm going to be chewing on that one for a while, Jill. We're going to have to come back and do this again, because I think that's going to be a big thing, I think, for a lot of coaches to understand and really see where that discontent comes from. And again, trying to, get to it before it rears its ugly head in a way that will be, potentially very divisive in your own program. So that's great insight. Thank you very much. And just like that, I've taken like an hour of your time, but thank you so much for chatting with us. It's always great to have you involved with the NFCA and our educational opportunities, and keep up the great work. I love following the things you're doing for coaches and athletes and women and other groups, all the time. So thank you so much for what you're doing for all of us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And again, it's an honor to be here. Keep doing what you're doing. Your education programs for your coaches, I think, are so good. They're so good. So I love it. And good luck to all you coaches out there, because it's kind of a mess right now. It's kind of a mess. And I love and am so grateful to all of you for sticking with this, because coaching is just a weird place to be right now, I feel like, in our society. So thank you for what you do. You are appreciated and loved.